Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will destroy everything you've been taught about value. You were lied to, not directly, not intentionally, but systematically. You were told that being kind would make you respected, that being loyal would make you important, that working hard would make you successful. And yet, you gave, you showed up, you stayed consistent, and still, you were overlooked, still ignored, still treated like you were optional. That's not bad luck, that's reality. Because the world does not reward effort, it does not reward goodness, it does not reward loyalty, it rewards one thing: necessity. And the moment you understand this, your entire life changes. Intro: the truth no one tells you. Look around you. Who gets chosen? Who gets respected? Who gets power? It's not the nicest person. It's not the most loyal. It's not even the hardest worker. It's the one people cannot function without. The one whose absence creates problems. The one whose presence solves them. That is value. Not kindness. Not effort. Dependence. So from this moment forward, you need to stop asking, how do I become liked? And start asking, how do I become necessary? Because once people need you, everything changes. Section 1. The illusion of value. From a very early age, you were quietly programmed to believe something that sounds noble, but is actually limiting. You were taught that if you behave properly, if you follow every rule, if you stay polite, agreeable, and cooperative, if you give without expecting anything in return, then eventually, life will reward you. Recognition will come. Respect will follow. Opportunities will appear. That's the promise you were sold. But reality doesn't function on promises. It functions on positioning. Because the real world is not built on fairness. It is built on leverage. And that changes everything. There's a distinction here that most people never truly understand. And that misunderstanding costs them years of their life. Being appreciated is not the same as being valuable. Appreciation is emotional. Value is strategic. Appreciation comes and goes. Value creates dependency. People appreciate you when you help them, when you're kind, when you make things easier. But they only value you when they cannot function the same way without you. That's a completely different level. And the problem is, most people are chasing appreciation their entire lives without even realizing it. They adjust their behavior to please others. They hide their real thoughts to avoid conflict. They overextend themselves just to be seen as good. They smile when they feel exhausted. They agree when they actually disagree. They say yes when every instinct is telling them to say no. They give time, attention, and energy, not because it's earned, but because they believe it will eventually be recognized. But here's what actually happens. They become easy to read, easy to access, easy to predict. And once you become predictable, you become manageable. Once you become always available, you become taken for granted. And once you become taken for granted, you become replaceable. That's the silent transition most people never notice. They think they're building relationships, but they're actually lowering their perceived value. They think consistency will make them respected, but instead, it makes them expected. An expectation without boundaries destroys importance. This is why the person who is always good, always helpful, always present, often ends up being the most overlooked, not because they lack quality, but because they lack scarcity. And scarcity is what creates value. When something is constantly available, it stops feeling special. When access requires no effort, it loses weight. When your presence is guaranteed, your absence holds no consequence. And in a world that subconsciously measures worth through rarity, being everywhere can make you worth nowhere. That's the uncomfortable truth. And once you see it clearly, you can never go back to being the same again. The real rule. Here's the law no one tells you. What is easy to access is easy to forget. What requires effort is respected. What cannot be replaced is protected. Every time you give without limits, you lower your own value. Every time you tolerate disrespect, you train people how to treat you. Every time you overextend, you become easier to replace. This isn't cruel, it's mechanical. And once you understand it, you stop playing the wrong game. Section 2, the law of dependency. If you want influence, you need to stop chasing approval and start creating reliance. Because people don't protect what they like, they protect what they need. Dependency is not manipulation, it's positioning. It's placing yourself in a role where outcomes depend on you, where progress requires you, where removing you creates friction. Think about it. Why are certain people untouchable? Not because they're loved, but because replacing them is costly. Your goal is simple: become the bridge between problem and solution. But not just any solution, a solution that cannot be easily replicated. How to build dependency. First, identify what others lack: skill, insight, connections, stability. Then develop that area relentlessly. Refine it until it becomes rare, until your presence equals advantage. Then connect your contribution to results. So when something works, it works because of you, and when you're gone, it doesn't. That's when perception shifts. That's when people start thinking, we need this person. And once that thought exists, power begins. Section 3. Invisible influence. The most dangerous form of control is the one that goes completely unnoticed. The kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand attention, doesn't reveal its presence. Because the moment power becomes visible, it invites resistance. People push back, they question, they defend their independence. But when influence is subtle, when it operates beneath awareness, it doesn't create resistance, it creates alignment. That's the difference. You don't need to dominate loudly. You don't need to assert authority in obvious ways. You need to guide, quietly, precisely, almost invisibly. Because real influence doesn't feel like control. It feels like a natural decision. It feels like choice. True influence looks like this. People walk away believing the idea was theirs, but you introduced it long before they recognized it. They feel ownership over the direction, but you designed the path they followed. They think they made the decision independently, but you shaped the options they were choosing from. And when someone believes something is the idea, they defend it, they commit to it, they execute it with confidence. That's the power of invisible influence. You're not forcing action, you're shaping perception. And perception drives behavior far more effectively than pressure ever could. Because when people feel controlled, they resist. But when people feel in control, they cooperate. That's the paradox. The less your influence is seen, the more powerful it becomes. You don't argue, you don't impose, you don't overwhelm, you position, you suggest, you frame. You create an environment where the right decision becomes obvious, even though it was engineered. That's control. Not through pressure, but through direction. Not through force, but through design. And once you understand this, you stop trying to overpower people and start learning how to guide them without them ever realizing it. Mastering subtle control. Stop trying to win arguments. Start shaping environments. Observe more. Speak less. Understand motivations, then position your input strategically. Not everywhere, but where it matters. You don't need to be loud, you need to be precise. Because the person who influences thinking controls outcomes. Section 4. Strategic absence. Constant availability quietly destroys your value. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually, until it's too late to notice. Because when people can reach you anytime, call you anytime, access you without effort, they stop respecting your time. Not because they're bad people, but because human nature adapts to what is always there. What becomes normal loses significance. Familiarity doesn't always build respect. More often, it breeds indifference. The more predictable your presence becomes, the less impact it carries. The more accessible you are, the less valuable your attention feels. And this is where most people make a critical mistake. They believe that being everywhere, responding instantly, always showing up, will increase their importance. They think visibility equals value. But in reality, overexposure reduces impact. When people see you constantly, they stop noticing you. When your presence is guaranteed, it stops being appreciated. When your time feels unlimited, it gets used carelessly. That's the hidden cost of always being available. Instead, you need to learn a different approach. Disappear intentionally. Not out of emotion, not out of frustration, not as a reaction, but as a strategy. Create space between your responses. Be selective with your presence. Choose when to engage and when to step back. Because absence does something presence cannot. It creates awareness. It makes people pause. It makes them think. It makes them notice the gap you leave behind. And in that gap, your value increases. People begin to anticipate your return. They begin to question your absence. They begin to realize the weight of what isn't there anymore. That shift is powerful, because now, you're no longer just present. You're felt. Strategic absence transforms you from an option into something people must consider. And once that happens, your time is no longer taken lightly. It's respected. The power of withdrawal, delay responses, skip unnecessary appearances, limit access. Not to play games, but to increase perceived value. Because when you're not always there, people notice. They start asking, where are they? What would they say? Why aren't they here? That question, that tension, is power. Section 5. Structural value. Being useful isn't enough. You must become foundational. There's a difference between helping and being essential. Helpers are replaceable. Builders are not. You don't want to be the person who fixes problems. You want to be the one who designs systems. Because systems outlast effort. Building irreplaceability. Ask yourself, where can I create structure? Where can I centralize knowledge? Where can I become the connector? The goal is to embed yourself so deeply that removing you breaks the system. That's when you move from optional to critical. Section 6. Psychological embedding. The highest level of influence is not external. It's not loud. It's not visible. It's internal. It happens beneath the surface, inside the way people think, interpret, and decide. Because external influence can be ignored. It can be challenged. It can be replaced. But internal influence becomes part of someone. And that's a completely different level of power. When people start associating you with clarity, with calm thinking, with direction in moments of uncertainty, when your presence brings structure to their confusion, confidence to their hesitation, and momentum to their stagnation, something shifts. You stop being just another voice. You become a reference point, a standard, a filter through which they begin to process situations. They don't just hear your words. They start thinking in patterns shaped by you. They begin to rely on your perspective, not because they are forced to, not because they lack independence, but because they trust it. Because your input consistently leads to better outcomes. Because your presence reduces the uncertainty. Because your thinking sharpens theirs. And over time, that trust becomes embedded. It becomes automatic. They start asking themselves questions like, what would they do here? How would they approach this? Am I seeing this clearly? That's the moment influence crosses a line. You are no longer guiding from the outside. You are influencing from within. And when that happens, your absence doesn't remove your impact. It continues, silently, because your way of thinking has already taken root. That's when influence becomes durable, stable, permanent, not tied to presence, not dependent on constant communication, but built into the very way someone navigates decisions. And that is the highest form of authority. When your influence doesn't need to be expressed, because it already exists inside them. How to integrate psychologically. Understand what people fear. Understand what they want. Then position yourself as the stabilizer, the guide, the reference point. When their confidence becomes linked to your presence, you've reached another level. Because now, you're not just in their environment, you're in their mind. Section 7. Control of future vision. People are not driven by reality as much as they are driven by what they believe is possible. Their actions, their decisions, their level of effort, all come from the picture they hold in their mind about the future. What they think they can achieve, what they think they can become, what they think is within reach. And whoever shapes that belief quietly controls their direction. Because once you influence what someone sees as possible, you influence the path they choose to take. You're no longer guiding behavior directly. You're guiding the vision that produces the behavior. That's a deeper level of influence. If you position yourself in a way where people begin to associate you with opportunity, with progress, with expansion, if your presence feels like access to something better, something bigger, something beyond their current limitations, they begin to gravitate toward you naturally. Not because they're being told to, not because they're being pressured, but because they want to stay connected to what you represent. You become linked to their sense of advancement, to their momentum, to their future. And once that connection is formed, they start aligning themselves with you. They listen more closely. They follow your suggestions more willingly. They adjust their behavior without needing instruction. Because in their mind, staying aligned with you means staying aligned with progress. And losing you feels like losing access to opportunity. That's the key. Not control through force, but influence through association. You don't have to push people forward when they believe you are the path forward. And that belief is powerful, because people protect what they think moves them ahead. They invest in what they believe elevates them. They stay loyal to what they feel expands their possibilities. So when your presence becomes tied to their growth, your absence becomes a risk they don't want to take. And that's when alignment stops being effort and starts becoming instinct. Leveraging aspiration. Find out what people want: status, security, recognition, success. Then position yourself as a gateway, not the destination, but the path. Because when people believe, without this person I don't progress, they stay, they listen, they follow. Section 8. Leaving at your peak. Most people overstay. They give too much. They stay too long. And eventually, their presence loses weight. But there's a different strategy. Leave when your value is highest, when your absence will be felt the most. Because that creates legacy. The power of exit. When you step back at the right moment, people don't forget you. They elevate you. They remember your impact. They feel your absence. And that absence becomes influence. Even when you're not there, now you understand. Value is not about being liked. It's about being necessary. It's about creating dependency, moving silently, controlling access, building systems, embedding psychologically, shaping direction, knowing when to disappear. This is not about manipulation, it's about awareness. Because once you see the system, you stop being controlled by it. From this moment forward, stop trying to be everything for everyone. Stop giving without intention. Stop lowering your worth for acceptance. Instead, build yourself into something rare, something precise, something irreplaceable. Because in a world full of noise, the one who becomes necessary becomes powerful, and the one who becomes powerful is never ignored again. Now I want you to do something. Not later, right now. Write this down. I am not here to be liked. I am here to be needed. Repeat it, internalize it, and start living. Because once you do, you won't chase attention anymore. Attention will come to you.